Naomi's sudden desire to have a child was a shock, especially given her lifelong fear of pain. But the real bombshell wasn't the timing. It was the parentage. Ethan is a boxer, she announced, her voice firm, almost clinical. He faces the constant threat of Parkinson's. I need to bank umbilical cord blood to save him. It was an ultimatum, delivered without a hint of negotiation. My heart, which had dared to flutter with a flicker of hope at the mention of children, now felt like a lead weight in my chest. "Don't worry," she continued, oblivious or indifferent to the tightening in my jaw. "It won't be like that with Ethan, and you can treat the child as your own." Years of my unwavering devotion had clearly cemented the idea in Naomi's mind that I was endlessly compliant, a man who would always bend to her will. She didn't seem to grasp that I might actually have a limit, but I did. I was a person, with dignity. I wasn't just Naomi's ever-present, ever-loyal shadow, always at her beck and call. "I disagree," I said, the words feeling heavy and foreign on my tongue. "It's divorce or no child." The very notion of Naomi wanting a child had initially thrown me. It felt so out of character. She was terrified of childbirth, terrified of the responsibility of motherhood. Intimacy with her was always guarded. A quick retreat, a sharp question. "Did you use protection?" It was almost mechanical, devoid of warmth. So, when she first brought up the idea of a baby, my primary emotions were disbelief and a deep-seated concern for her. "Why, Naomi?" I'd asked gently, reaching for her hand. "Childbirth is incredibly painful. It takes a toll on your body. I don't want you to do something you'll regret on a whim." Naomi had blinked, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. Then, she'd leaned into me, wrapping her arms around my waist, resting her head against my chest. A familiar gesture, yet tonight, it felt different, loaded. "It's because Ethan is a boxer," she repeated, her voice muffled against my shirt. "He's at risk of Parkinson's. I need to bank the umbilical cord blood to help him." My heart plunged into an icy abyss. The warmth of her embrace, the comforting rhythm of her breathing against me. It all turned to frost. The flicker of hope I'd felt moments ago was extinguished, leaving behind a chilling emptiness. Ethan Zhao, Naomi's first love, the man who remained, years later, an unshakable, idealized figure in the landscape of her memory. A ghost that haunted our relationship. I slowly raised my hand, placing it tentatively on her shoulder, the gesture feeling awkward, almost intrusive now. Unease coiled in my stomach. "Hospitals have cord blood banks," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "We can pay for it. Why does you having a baby have to be the answer?" "Oh, Jason, you don't understand," she sighed, pulling back slightly, but still holding onto my hands. "Of course, blood-related cord blood is always better, more compatible. Besides," she hesitated, as if the words that followed might wound me, yet she pushed on, as if compelled to speak the truth, however painful. "You know how I feel about Ethan, Jason. I don't want him to suffer. I'm willing to have this child for him." Back then, after Ethan had abruptly ended things, leaving Naomi heartbroken and adrift, it had been me who'd patiently pieced her back together. Day after day, I'd sought her out, trying to coax a smile, to bring a spark of joy back into her eyes. I'd thought our years together, the quiet intimacy we shared, had finally eclipsed the memory of that other man, that betrayer. But this one sentence shattered that illusion, reducing me to the same heartbroken man I was years ago, standing outside her pain. I was reminded, with a brutal clarity, that true love, for Naomi, meant encompassing everything about Ethan, even the lingering wounds he'd inflicted. "And what about me, Naomi?" I asked, the words catching in my throat. "Where does this leave me?" A sudden anger flared in Naomi's eyes, replacing the feigned tenderness. She looked at me with a mixture of disappointment and something akin to disgust. "Jason, how can you be so callous? This is about a human life. I can't just stand by and do nothing." It struck me then, the stark shift in our dynamic. Naomi, who had rarely raised her voice to me in all our years together, had become increasingly volatile since Ethan had re-entered her life. Now, She was openly accusing me, condemning me. My hand clenched into a fist, then slowly unfurled, the feeling of something precious, something irreplaceable, slipping through my fingers. I managed a weak smile, looking at Naomi, her face contorted with anger, her eyes blazing as if I were the villain in this scenario. "I disagree," I repeated, my voice steadier this time, despite the tremor in my hands. "Divorce or no child." Even as the words left my lips, a knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. My palms were clammy, a sensation I hadn't experienced since facing a high-stakes business deal whose outcome was uncertain. I desperately wanted Naomi to offer even a fraction of the compromise, the affection she'd shown me over the years. A flicker of love, perhaps? But my hope was met with cold indifference. Naomi simply stepped back from my embrace, her eyes fixed on me, devoid of warmth. "You don't get a say, Jason. I will have this baby." As if on cue, her phone chimed, a bright, cheerful melody cutting through the tense atmosphere. She glanced down at it, then back at me, her expression still hard, unforgiving. "After all these years in business, Jason, you've become so cold-blooded," she accused, her voice dripping with disdain. "So petty and jealous that you'd actually put a human life at risk just to spite me." My gaze drifted to the Cartier bracelet on her wrist, the Dior coat draped over her shoulders, all gifts, tokens of my cold-blooded business acumen, of my success. Success I'd always envisioned sharing with her. "Hello, Ethan?" Naomi's voice suddenly softened, transforming into the honeyed tones of a doting lover. The abrupt shift was jarring. He agreed. "You can move in." A faint blush rose on her neck, visible even in the dim light. My eyes widened, a cold dread seeping into my bones. This wasn't a discussion, it was a notification. They had already planned this. They had already begun. A profound weariness washed over me, the insidious feeling that the happiness I'd believed was mine was, in fact, borrowed, and the loan was now being called in. Naomi hung up, her gaze still fixed on me, adopting the cold, passive-aggressive silence she often used when we argued. "He'll be moving in," she stated, her voice flat. "Jason, I promise you, once the baby is born, I won't have anything to do with him." A crumb of affection, a hollow promise tossed to me like a bone, offered by the goddess I had worshipped for years, yet it held no warmth, no comfort. It was an insult, really. Naomi turned away without another word, leaving me standing there, paralyzed. She hurried downstairs, eager to help Ethan, who was, apparently, prepared to move in immediately. I remembered our early days, the struggles of building our business, the constant moves as we chased different ventures. Naomi had always been a reluctant participant in those upheavals, preferring to observe from the sidelines, leaving the heavy lifting to me. And I had always obliged, gladly bearing the burden, wanting to shield her from any inconvenience. I'd patiently coaxed her through her frustrations, giving her everything within my power. Now, she was buzzing with energy, a willing accomplice, eagerly hauling boxes alongside the muscular Ethan, not a hint of complaint. I took off my gold-rimmed glasses, rubbing my tired eyes. I looked around at our home, a space saturated with memories, every corner echoing with the ghosts of our shared past, the scent of what I had believed to be a loving home. I had vowed, during those nomadic years, that I would give Naomi a stable home, a sanctuary in this expensive city. And I had. But now, just a few years later, that sanctuary was about to be invaded, occupied by a stranger. And I was powerless to stop it because, ultimately, Naomi didn't truly love me. Exhausted, heartbroken, I left the home I had created for her, the home that was now being surrendered to Ethan, who would undoubtedly bask in his smug victory. Back in my empty apartment, a sterile, impersonal space, there was no word from Naomi, no desperate plea to stay. A chilling certainty settled over me. I had been truly, definitively abandoned. My love, my devotion, it was worthless to her. Deep down, I didn't believe her promise of no contact after the baby was born. Could anyone realistically sever ties with the father of their child, especially someone with whom they shared such a deep history? The answer was obvious, and so I chose to withdraw, to remove myself from the equation. But even now, in this cold, quiet apartment, the full weight of Naomi's indifference was crushing. She simply didn't care. Or perhaps she believed I would never truly leave, that my love for her was so profound, so unwavering, that I would always return. And perhaps she was right. Even now, the memories of our past held me captive. I threw myself into work, a numb automaton, seeking solace in the relentless demands of my career. I became a silent voyeur into Naomi's happiness, scrolling through her social media, each photo a fresh stab of pain. Naomi and Ethan, laughing. Against the backdrop of a sunset over the West Lake, silhouetted against the twinkling lights of a Ferris wheel, hands clasped, promising forever. Each image tore at me, ripping away pieces of my heart, pieces that were irrevocably Naomi. It was a slow, agonizing bleed. A silent question echoed in my mind. What if that were me? A month of relentless insomnia followed, the gnawing anxiety fueled by work pressures. Just as I began to accept the impossibility of reconciliation, just as I was drafting divorce papers, she appeared. My office, usually a fortress of calm, had always been open to her. She walked in as if she owned the place. "Jason, I need you to do something for Ethan. Oh my God, your dark circles. You look terrible. Haven't you been sleeping?" Naomi rushed towards me, cupping my face in her hands, the familiar gesture sending a jolt through me. For a fleeting moment, it felt like the old Naomi, the Naomi who only had eyes for me. I stared at her, greedy for this illusion of intimacy, afraid to blink and shatter the fragile moment. "Why aren't you taking care of yourself?" she scolded, her voice laced with a hint of the old concern. "You know you're not well. If you keep this up, I'm going to be really angry." In the past, when I'd push myself too hard for work, Naomi would threaten to be angry, a playful ultimatum designed to force me to rest. The memory of those moments was bittersweet, achingly nostalgic. But then, her phone rang, the screen flashing the word, husband. My eyes flickered to the screen, then back to Naomi's face. The illusion shattered. She quickly silenced the phone, a forced, embarrassed laugh escaping her lips. "Ethan is always messing with my phone," she said, her voice too bright. "Don't read into it. Besides, you're the one being childish, running away and not even calling me. So immature." So, my pain, my withdrawal, my silent suffering, it was all just childishness, jealousy, a petty tantrum in her eyes. And yet, despite this, she hadn't uttered a single word of reconciliation, of apology. Her visit, I realized, had a different purpose entirely. "Ethan just got back from overseas," she continued, her tone shifting, businesslike now. "He's injured, and without fights, he has no income. I need you to help him find some endorsements." The fleeting moment of feigned concern vanished, replaced by a demanding, almost aggressive tone. She hadn't forgotten her real purpose. Even now, standing in front of me, physically present, her heart was elsewhere, with Ethan. Between Ethan and me, her loyalty, her love, remained firmly with him. I agreed. I agreed because I couldn't bear to see Naomi, my proud Naomi, humbled, begging for Ethan. At least not yet. Not while a flicker of love, however faint, still burned within me. I couldn't bear to see her demean herself for him. I used my connections, leveraging my resources, securing Ethan some high-profile endorsements, deals that aligned with his tough guy image. At the celebratory dinner, Ethan preened under the investors' praise, basking in the attention, his face flushed with triumph. He acted as if these opportunities were solely due to his own merit, his own star power. I remained silent, ignoring his subtle jabs, his thinly veiled gloating. Ethan, fueled by alcohol and arrogance, raised his glass, practically choking down the liquor, as if the endorsements were already signed and sealed. But I knew better. Dinner table promises were just that, promises until the ink dried on the contracts. I advised him to take it easy, to watch his health, hoping to preempt whatever smug, insulting comment he was about to make. He brushed my hand away dismissively. "Jason, spare me the fake concern, okay?" he slurred. His eyes narrowed. "You're just jealous, aren't you? Jealous that your beloved wife wouldn't have a baby with you, but she's willing to have one for me. And even you have to swallow your pride and hand-deliver these endorsements to me." My brow furrowed. This wasn't just arrogance. It was crude, disrespectful. He was dragging Naomi down, cheapening her in front of everyone. He thought he was provoking me, but he was actually diminishing the woman he claimed to care about. "He's had too much to drink," I said, my voice low and controlled, signaling to my assistant, "Get him out of here." Ethan shrugged off my assistant's hand, his gaze fixed on me, a sneer twisting his lips. "Still so composed," he mocked. "No wonder Naomi says being with you is like being with a dead fish. She loves the excitement, the life I bring. A woman like Naomi? She's a sucker for attention, a total pushover. Haha, I just have to snap my fingers and she comes running." The room fell silent, everyone watching the spectacle unfold. I couldn't let him continue, couldn't let him further degrade Naomi, even if our relationship was in tatters. My fist flew out, connecting with his jaw. Just then, Naomi walked in. Her eyes widened in shock, then narrowed with fury. Before I could explain, before I could even speak, her hand flashed out, and the sting of her slap echoed in the suddenly silent room. "Jason, are you insane? Have you not caused enough trouble? You promised you'd help Ethan, and now you're going back on your word, just because you're petty and jealous." My eyes burned, tears pricking behind them. I stared at her, at the woman I had loved, the woman who was now using the most hurtful words she could find to wound me. I barely recognized her anymore. Was this the woman I had built my life around? Ethan, sensing an advantage, immediately played the victim, clutching his stomach, groaning theatrically. "My stomach, it hurts." Naomi's anger instantly dissolved into concern. She rushed to his side, her arm protectively around his, guiding him out of the room, away from me. The room slowly returned to its former cacophony of clinking glasses and forced laughter, as if nothing had happened. But then, an older client, someone I'd worked with for years, approached me, his expression sympathetic. "You know, back when we first started working together, you'd sometimes drink yourself under the table," he said quietly. "And I never saw your wife come to pick you up. Now this other guy fakes a stomachache, and she's rushing to his side. Sometimes it's just the end of the road, Jason. Dragging it out will only hurt you both more." His words resonated with a painful truth. I stared blankly at him for a moment, then reached out and shook his hand. I remembered those nights, the late-night business dinners, the pressure to drink, to prove my commitment. I would stumble home, reeking of alcohol, collapsing on the couch like a corpse. I never wanted to burden Naomi, never wanted her to see me like that, to smell the liquor on my breath, something she always disliked. I'd wait until the early hours, shivering in the cold, before forcing myself to make a sobering soup, shower, and finally creep into bed, careful not to disturb her. But now, looking at the picture Ethan had just sent to Naomi. Naomi's back to the camera, in their kitchen, stirring a pot, presumably making him soup. My vision blurred. I raised a hand to my face and realized, with a jolt, that I was crying. Silent, choked sobs racking my body. Maybe the old client was right. Maybe love, when it reached this point, was just mutual destruction waiting to happen. Maybe Naomi and I were never meant to be. Perhaps those years of happiness had been borrowed time, a stolen dream. Now, I had to face the reality of a future without Naomi, a future devoid of her presence, her touch, her everything. We were truly at the end. I sent Naomi the divorce papers, along with a generous settlement, a final act of, what? Love? Guilt? Desperation? Her call came almost immediately, but she remained silent for a long, agonizing moment. "Does it have to be like this, Jason?" she finally whispered, her voice trembling. "I never wanted it to end like this. I know I said some terrible things the other night, and I know you were just trying to protect me from saying more." hurtful things to myself. Her voice trailed off, weak and unconvincing. Don't, Naomi, I interrupted gently. It's not just about that night. It's about everything. I'm just tired, Naomi, truly tired. A choked sob escaped her. I don't believe it, she whispered, her breath ragged over the line. I do love you, Jason. Really, I do. And once this baby is born, I swear, I won't see Ethan again. We're just doing this to have a healthy baby. Parents who love each other raise healthy children. My lips moved, but no sound came out for a moment. Then, a weary, hollow voice finally emerged. Naomi, I said, the word sounding foreign, unfamiliar. If it's just about the cord blood, then it's not fair to the child, is it? If it's about Ethan, then I suggest you sign the divorce papers. And if you're staying with me just for me, then it's all just a cruel joke, isn't it, Naomi? She started to protest, to argue, but in all our years together, I had always been the one to apologize, to smooth things over. She had no experience in placating, in coaxing, and she didn't seem inclined to learn, not for me. The call ended abruptly, unresolved. The divorce papers were returned and signed, but I didn't pursue it further. I simply accepted the inevitable 2-year separation, the automatic legal dissolution of our marriage. Sunlight streamed into my office, a quiet warmth that I allowed myself to bask in. For so long, I had been consumed by work, by Naomi, by the relentless pursuit of success, of her happiness. Life had been a constant blur of activity, of striving. I hadn't wanted her to suffer, to struggle. I had wanted to give her everything I could: love, security, comfort, wealth. And now, living alone wasn't so bad. Life without love, I realized, was still life. Perhaps, in some ways, it was even better. No more compromises, no more bending to someone else's whims. Just peace. I hadn't checked Naomi's social media in weeks. I even started cooking for myself again. Simple, healthy meals. Everything was manageable. If only the company wasn't facing this unexpected turbulence. Naomi, it turned out, was still a shareholder. Years ago, when I'd founded the company, I'd promised her equity. A promise made out of love, out of a desire to share everything with her. Now, it was a complication, a knot in the already tangled web of our lives, especially in these uncertain times. However, I had always wanted to give Naomi the chance to shine. She was a graduate of a prestigious finance program. She deserved the opportunity to build her own career, to have her own space to explore her potential, rather than being confined to the walls of our home. But then, about 6 months ago, Naomi had stopped coming to work. She'd playfully announced she wanted to try being a full-time housewife. I'd been accommodating, accepting of her choices, as always. Without a fuss, I quickly hired other talented individuals to fill the gap she left. And yet, today, I had seen her again, in a department where she had no business being. It was then that I realized she'd been using her position, her shareholder status, to push for Ethan to become the spokesperson for our company's new product line. And she'd done it all in secret, bypassing protocol, neglecting to report it to me. A blatant abuse of power. As a shareholder in this company, Naomi, you should be even more meticulous in vetting potential spokespeople, I said, my voice cold and even. What are you implying, Jason? She snapped back, her eyes flashing defensively. Are you suggesting Ethan has some kind of shady past? I trust his character completely. I'll vouch for him. I gave a short, humorless laugh. Vouching is meaningless in business, Naomi. The company's future requires due diligence, not empty assurances. Then we can wait for the background check to be completed before finalizing anything, I continued, my voice rising slightly. Instead of rushing into a contract now, bypassing me, and pressuring my assistant. Naomi's expression shifted, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes as she took in my anger. Suddenly, she tilted her chin up, looking at me with an air of disdain. Is this really just because of Ethan and me? Are you targeting him out of spite? Didn't I call you petty and small-minded? I'm offering my personal guarantee, Jason. What more do you want? No wonder Ethan said he tried to reach out to you, but you blocked his number. That's just childish. I glanced down at my phone, at the blocked contacts list. Ethan Zhao. Naomi. Yes, I had blocked them both. I'd blocked everyone and everything that represented the past, trying to make a clean break. But in Naomi's mind, in her ingrained perception of me, this was just another petty act of jealousy, another attempt to get Ethan. In the past, I might have tried to argue, to explain. But faced with Naomi's fixed assumptions, my words felt hollow, pointless. What was the use? Instead, I rubbed my temples, a sharp edge entering my voice. And exactly how much value does your guarantee actually hold, Naomi? Naomi gasped, her eyes widening in disbelief at my harsh tone. Around us, a ripple of shocked whispers spread through the office. Those who knew even a fragment of the situation exchanged knowing, pitying glances in her direction. She stiffened, crossing her arms defensively, but still holding my gaze. How about I use everything you're giving me in the divorce settlement as collateral? Is that valuable enough for you? A bitter laugh escaped me. The generous settlement I was offering in our divorce. She was using it as leverage, a bargaining chip against me. If this weren't coming from the woman who was still, technically, my wife, I might have actually applauded. What a perfectly matched pair they were. Ethan and Naomi. So deeply, so perfectly suited to each other. It was almost admirable in a twisted way. But Naomi's eagerness to rush through this endorsement, her insistence on immediate signing, something was definitely off. Beyond Ethan's supposed need for work, beyond his comeback narrative, I considered her slightly protruding stomach. And then, the rumors about Ethan's past resurfaced in my mind. Whispers of a gambling problem, a dangerous addiction. This wasn't just opportunistic. It was calculated, predatory. They were trying to exploit the company I had painstakingly built. I nodded to my assistant. Draft the contract, I instructed, my voice sharp. If there was a problem, I would face it head-on. Naomi scrutinized the contract, her eyes darting across the clauses, seemingly reassured when she found no immediate red flags. She signed it quickly, a visible sigh of relief escaping her lips as she put pen to paper. She stopped me as I turned to leave, her gaze softening, the aggressive edge replaced by a wistful, almost nostalgic look. "It's been a while, Jason," she said, her voice quieter now. "You look good. Are you doing okay?" "I'm doing very well, Ms. Naomi," I replied, the formal address deliberately distancing. "And I'll be doing even better once you sign the divorce papers." Her face flushed crimson, embarrassment and anger warring for dominance. She glanced around at the onlookers, then back at me, a wounded look in her eyes. "Do you have to be so cold, Jason? You've changed." Changed? I thought, a bitter amusement rising within me. This was nothing compared to the things she and Ethan had said, the ways they had treated me. "Ms. Naomi," I said, my voice dropping, losing all warmth. "Didn't you always say I was boring, like a dead fish? Since we're going our separate ways, why pretend to be concerned now? Weren't I the one you so readily discarded?" My voice cracked slightly, raw edge of pain surfacing despite my efforts to remain detached. I could feel the familiar tightening in my chest, the nausea threatening to return. I had to get out of there. I pulled away from her outstretched hand, turning and walking away, not stopping until I reached the relative safety of the hallway. Leaning against the cool wall, I pressed a hand against my chest, trying to calm the frantic hammering of my heart. Unbelievable. Even after everything, a part of me still reacted to her, still felt the sting of her words, the ghost of that old love. But no more. From this moment on, the Naomi of my memories would remain there. Idealized, beautiful, safely locked away in the past. I would not allow myself to be drawn back into her orbit. As I dug deeper into Ethan's recent activities, the reason for Naomi's urgency became horrifyingly clear. Ethan was drowning in debt, a staggering 100 million yuan, a black hole that threatened to consume him. And there was more. He had made enemies overseas, powerful people he had wronged, and he'd fled back to China in a desperate attempt to escape the consequences. What they didn't know, what? Naomi didn't know, was that our new product launch was heavily focused on overseas markets. Ethan, the toxic spokesperson, was about to be exposed to a much wider audience than he anticipated. Since he was so eager to walk into the trap, I would gladly set it. The crisis hit like a tidal wave. Ethan's gambling addiction exploded into public view, fueled by what looked suspiciously like a coordinated smear campaign. Then, the person Ethan had wronged overseas arrived. A hulking, menacing figure, a former boxing partner of Ethan's. This man had been banned from boxing for doping, a scandal orchestrated by Ethan to eliminate competition. Ethan had framed his partner, poisoning him with performance-enhancing drugs. The boxer, now consumed by bitterness and a thirst for revenge, had suffered greatly, both professionally and physically. I hadn't realized Ethan could sink so low, stooping to deliberate sabotage and betrayal. Disgusted, I compiled all the incriminating evidence, everything I had uncovered, and sent it to Naomi. The man she had idealized, the man who brought her excitement, was revealed to be a lawless, gambling-addicted monster. Thankfully, the contract I had drafted had loopholes. We were able to sever ties with Ethan immediately, effectively erasing him from the product launch. Naomi was furious. Ignoring her 7-month pregnancy, she stormed off to confront Ethan. It wasn't the first time. Once before, angered by his late nights and absences, she had briefly left home, a dramatic gesture of protest. But Ethan was indifferent. He treated her with the same casual disregard she had once shown me, dismissive, neglectful. I simply used the power of public opinion, subtly amplifying the spread of Ethan's scandals, letting the internet do its work, turning him into a pariah. Ethan, cornered and desperate, retreated to Naomi, begging for forgiveness, feigning remorse. Naomi was torn, furious, yet still trapped by her own emotions. And then, Naomi came to me. This time, though, I felt nothing. No flicker of sympathy, no tug of longing, just a cold, weary indifference. "Please, Jason," she pleaded, tears streaming down her face. "My baby needs a father. I'm begging you, please help him." "Naomi, we have nothing to do with each other anymore," I said, my voice flat. "Someone will be in touch with you about transferring your shares. As for helping him, absolutely not. The fact that you're still trying to protect such a despicable person, it's sickening." Naomi's sobs intensified, a heartbroken wail. Even her tears, once capable of melting my resolve, now left me unmoved. I felt a pang, not of sympathy, but of a detached pity. "I regret it, Jason," she choked out, her voice thick with tears. "Why would he do these things? But my baby really needs a father." I hung up, severing the connection, severing another thread of the past, steeling myself against any lingering weakness. Ethan had spun a web of lies for Naomi, claiming it was all a smear campaign, that apart from a few gambling losses, everything was fabricated. But Naomi wasn't stupid. The contract cancellation, the sheer volume of evidence, it was undeniable. Still, Ethan wept, beat his chest, begged her to plead with me to save him, while conveniently avoiding any direct confrontation himself. Naomi, heavily pregnant and increasingly desperate, started showing up at my office every day. But the doors were no longer open to her. She was kept waiting, turned away. Her face grew gaunt, the designer. Clothes replaced by drab, shapeless outfits. She carried a lunchbox, a sight that once would have filled me with warmth, the promise of a homemade meal, a gesture of affection I had always craved. Naomi had always been fiercely protective of her hands, unwilling to engage in anything that didn't align with her image of delicate refinement, especially kitchen work. So, I had taken it upon myself to learn to cook, burning dish after dish in my early attempts. Naomi, surprisingly, hadn't complained about my culinary disasters. She had even smiled, her dimples deepening, encouraging me, saying my burnt offerings were not bad. She had promptly gotten food poisoning that night, and I'd spent the rest of the night racked with guilt. Then, Naomi had stepped in, taking over the kitchen, revealing a hidden talent. I had been humbled, defeated in the kitchen wars, and had become her devoted sous chef. Those were some of the few truly happy days we had shared. The memory softened my resolve, just a fraction. Perhaps, just this once, I could grant her a final audience, a final closure to the past. "I can help resolve some of this," I said, my voice neutral as she finally stood before me in my office. "But the financial debt? He needs to earn his way out of that himself." "Thank you, Jason," she whispered, her voice trembling. I did so many things to hurt you, said so many awful things. And now I see that you were always good to me. I wasn't worthy of you." "There's no worthy or unworthy in love, Naomi," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "And there's certainly no hierarchy after a breakup. We just aren't meant to be." I slid the divorce papers across the desk, the ones she had refused to sign before. From the settlement, I had carved out a portion, a lifeline to help her in this immediate crisis. Perhaps it was foolish, a weakness on my part. I couldn't bring myself to be completely heartless towards Naomi, even now. But I also knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was truly the end. Even the word divorce no longer triggered the familiar pang of dread, the ingrained fear of losing her. It was just a word, a simple, ordinary ending. In the past 6 months, I had rebuilt myself, piece by piece. I no longer lived in fear, constantly questioning the reality of my happiness. I was no longer consumed by anxiety, by the fear of Naomi slipping away, of the ghost of her first love haunting our every moment. True closure wasn't about dramatic pronouncements or bitter recriminations. It was about accepting the end as something ordinary, unremarkable, something that barely stirred the surface of your emotions. Naomi signed the papers, then rested a hand on her swollen belly, tears overflowing, a torrent that seemed unstoppable. Can I hug you one last time, Jason?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "No, Ms. Naomi," I replied, shaking my head gently. "Hugs are for lovers, a way to deepen intimacy, to offer warmth. You should save your hugs for Ethan." I brought you lunch," she stammered, pushing a lunchbox forward. "I made it for you. I know you like spicy chicken wings." I managed a small, sad smile, taking off my glasses to polish them, a familiar nervous habit. "Actually, those were always your favorite. I just learned to make them for you. But it doesn't matter now, does it?" "I'm so sorry, Jason," she sobbed, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry for everything. Can you ever forgive me?" I didn't answer. Naomi's tears flowed faster, harder. I hadn't seen her cry like this since the very first time I met her, heartbroken and lost after Ethan had left her. But in all the years we'd been together, she had never cried like this, never shown such raw vulnerability. I simply watched her, my expression calm, almost gentle, the same patient, understanding face I had always shown her. Perhaps I was still that stagnant pool of water, unable to create waves, content to silently harbor the turbulent, unspoken love within. Naomi went home, but that night, she was admitted to the hospital. The doctor's first call, a dozen unanswered attempts, went straight to voicemail. Finally, he called the last number in her recent call log mine. I rushed to the hospital, finding a harried doctor pacing anxiously outside the emergency room doors. Ethan, it turned out, hadn't been appeased by Naomi's pleas to me for financial help. His true nature, stripped bare of pretense, had emerged in all its ugliness. He had attacked Naomi, a brutal, senseless assault on a defenseless pregnant woman. He had punched and kicked her until she was bleeding, until the baby, our baby, was in danger. A passerby, hearing Naomi's cries, had called emergency services. Ethan, the coward, had simply fled. My hand trembled as I signed the consent forms, my disgust for Ethan reaching a new depth. He was beyond redemption. I dialed the number of Ethan's vengeful boxing rival. The man was a broken shell, his career ruined, his mind fractured by the doping scandal. A man like that, a man teetering on the edge, was the perfect instrument of Ethan's destruction. Hours later, Naomi was out of emergency surgery, but the baby was gone. Her body, already weakened by pregnancy, had suffered a devastating blow. Pale and fragile, she lay in the hospital bed, her eyes finding mine. In that silent exchange, understanding passed between us. She knew. "Jason," she whispered, her voice weak, barely a breath. "He really is a terrible person, isn't he? And all those years I loved that man. He hit me so hard, Jason," she continued, her voice cracking. "My baby, it's gone. And my love for him. It was all a joke, wasn't it? I was so wrong, Jason. I'm so sorry." She clutched at the white sheets, her eyes red-rimmed, filled with a desolate regret. Her body was rigid with tension, her back arched, a desperate, unconscious attempt to protect the emptiness where her child had been. "He punches like a monster," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "Punch after punch. He just kept hitting me. He's changed. Or maybe that's who he always was, the real Ethan. He even called me a pathetic lapdog." "Oh, Jason." I gently patted the blanket, a silent gesture of comfort, urging her to stop. But Naomi reached out, her frail hand grasping mine with surprising strength. "Jason," she pleaded, her voice a desperate whisper. Can you stay with me? Just for a while?" "I can't, Naomi," I said, gently disengaging my hand. "I have things to do. But don't worry, he won't come near you again." "No, that's not. I mean, I have to go, Naomi." Without waiting for her to finish, I turned and left, walking quickly away. I was afraid of my own weakness, afraid of the lingering pull Naomi still held over me. I knew I had moved on, that the chains of the past were broken. But Naomi, in her vulnerability, in her pain, still had the power to unravel my resolve. And so, I had to leave, to cut the thread before it could re-entangle me, to extinguish the embers before they could reignite. Ethan was apprehended, found cowering in a cheap motel. His boxing rival, fueled by years of resentment and a manic rage, had inflicted a brutal beating. The boxer, his sanity frayed, his fists lethal, had unleashed a torrent of pent-up fury. Ethan, seeing stars, his vision blurring, could only curl up, shielding his head. Even after the boxer finally relented, Ethan was a broken mess. He discovered, with chilling clarity, that he was losing control of his limbs, his body trembling uncontrollably. The Parkinson's, long a looming threat, had been prematurely triggered by the trauma. "No, umbilical cord blood," he whimpered, his voice slurred, his body convulsing. "I need umbilical cord blood. Naomi, I need you, Naomi." I watched him writhe on the ground, a pathetic, broken creature. "The umbilical cord blood you needed?" I said, my voice cold, devoid of pity. "Didn't you just beat it out of existence? Where are you going to get it now, Ethan?" "Hospital," he gasped, his eyes wide with terror. "Hospital. They have it. Save me. I don't want to be sick." "So, you did know hospitals had it," I said, a grim satisfaction creeping into my voice. "You knew all along, and you deliberately manipulated Naomi, played with her emotions, just to hurt me, didn't you? Just to feel superior?" Ethan recognized my voice then, his trembling body freezing. He cowered, shrinking away from me, unable to speak. I signaled to my men. "Take him," I instructed, my voice flat. "Send him to the underground ring in Macau. Let him fight for his life." Literally. Naomi slowly recovered physically, but her calls and messages continued, a relentless stream of digital pleas. "Jason, please come see me. Please. Jason, I miss you so much. I was wrong. You were always the best for me. Jason, please talk to me. Jason, I really miss you." Naomi, now vulnerable, now alone, was clinging to me, projecting onto me the desperate need for connection, for comfort, like a fledgling bird imprinting on the first creature it sees. But I remained unresponsive, a silent, unyielding wall. I refused to revisit the pain of the past, to be dragged back into the shadows of our broken relationship. I would not return to being the man Naomi had seen as lacking, as unworthy, as less than. Naomi continued to flood my phone with messages, detailing her days, recounting shared memories, moments from our past. She remembered everything, it seemed. She had simply chosen to forget, to dismiss them, until now. In the past, I would have cherished those messages, devoured every detail, desperate for any sign of her attention, her affection. It would have felt like validation, like being seen, being needed. But now, I had silenced her notifications, muted her presence in my life. There was no reply, no acknowledgement. This, I realized, was what it felt like to be truly detached, to be free from the suffocating grip of unrequited love. I was finally walking away from the shadow of Naomi, from the haunting echoes of our shared past. And in doing so, I was finally finding myself. The past was just that, the past. Tomorrow, finally, held the promise of a brighter, unburdened future.